and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. You're watching your Top Think Tanks review, and I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Now, today on the show, we're going to look at 5 different top 50 United States think tanks, and we'll look at the top stories from each one of their websites. To begin the show, the Brookings Institution looks at the U.S. economy if it continued with the growth it experienced last quarter. Then a Council on Foreign Relations senior fellow is interviewed about the meaning of Mosul. Next, the American Enterprise Institute says the Venezuelan dictatorship digs in and hunkers down. Staying in Venezuela, Human Rights Watch says there is no more time to waste to help the Venezuelan crisis. And then we'll end the show with the Pew Research Center and an update on voters' opinions as the elections are just around the corner. Now, the U.S. economy grew 2.9% during the third quarter of 2016, almost double the average rate of the prior decade, but historically still slow. For example, between 1950 and 1970, the economy grew on average 4.2% a year. It's been 15 years since we've had 1 year of growth at that level. The speed at which the economy grows is the most important factor determining whether workers' wages and standards of living rise. The Federal Reserve predicts the economy will grow on average 1.8% over the next decade. Now, what would the country look like if the economy continued to grow at last quarter's rate of 2.9%? Well, additional growth of 1.1% a year over the Fed's projection for 10 years would produce an economy $2.4 trillion larger by 2016, or about $6,850 per person, given projected population growth. Of course, the spoils of greater growth would not be shared equally, given that today's households in the top 5% earn over 27 times more than what households in the bottom 20% earn. Nonetheless, even if the share of national income going to the bottom quartile remained consistent, a paltry 3.2%, average income would nearly double among these households, not accounting for inflation. Now, economic growth of 2.9% for 10 years would generate $600 billion more per year in tax revenue in 2026 than currently projected by CBO. While not enough to address the projected budget shortfall of $1.2 trillion, the increase in the public offers would go a long way toward improving the quality of life of many Americans. For example, that increase is 6 times larger than what the federal government now invests in food stamps, homeless prevention support, and HIV programming and research combined. It is twice what we spend on K-12 education. Now, long-run economic growth is by no means the only challenge the next president will face, but it's likely the most important one. Part of the president's job will be to open people's eyes to what growth can accomplish. The bigger job will be to do something about it. So, kind of tying this into our last article of the show and people's opinions of the presidential candidate, if you're kind of unsure on who to vote for, this is one of the main issues that you should consider, is look at their economic policies and who has the greater potential to grow our economy over the next 4 years of their presidency. So maybe consider that when you're trying to decide who to vote for the next president if you're still undecided. Now, next, the Council on Foreign Relations follows up on Mosul as a U.S.-backed campaign to recapture Iraq's largest city from ISIS is underway. The urban combat required to take back the city will be complicated by the panoply of armed groups gathering to fight the Islamic State. These fighters don't have experience coordinating with one another and in many cases are mortal enemies, says Council on Foreign Relations senior fellow Philip H. Gordon. Now, Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, at the helm of an Iraqi army that has been rebuilt from its collapse in 2014, is poised to tamp down these rivalries during battle. But restoring a stable order in its aftermath will be more challenging, says Gordon, a former National Security Council official in the Obama administration. Now, it's a city of nearly 2 million people, and ISIS got its hands on a lot of resources there, so substantively it's highly valuable, but symbolically even more so. This is where the Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared the caliphate in June 2014. and Mosul symbolized the group's purported ability to hold a major capital city and to be a state. ISIS has lost nearly half of the territory it held in Iraq over the last 18 months, but Mosul is where it all started. To take this jewel away would be a devastating psychological setback to the group. Now, it appears the more that ISIS loses territory and fails in its desire to create and maintain a state, the more it lashes out externally. If it can't win over recruits in Europe and elsewhere by showing successes on the battlefield and claiming to restore 7th century glory to the region, then it will look to attack elsewhere. It will seek to provoke Western governments into measures that radicalize populations further, as we've seen with attacks in Brussels, Paris, Istanbul, and the United States. Another likely consequence is that ISIS fighters and leaders will flee to Syria. Some have probably already fled, and others will manage to sneak out during the battle. They will bolster the ISIS presence in parts of Syria. Now, ISIS is hard to contain, so they're doing their best, step by step really, to wipe out this Islamic State. So there's a lot more information on the campaign on Mosul and attacking the Islamic State on this article on the Council on Foreign Relations website. Now next, the American Enterprise Institute says the Venezuelan dictatorship digs in and hunkers down. Now, Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and the band of criminals who calls the shots in that country on Thursday smothered any hope for a constitutional democratic recall that would have allowed voters to replace his repressive and hapless regime. The country's democratic forces now are rallying the people to confront Maduro, whose government is incapable of resolving food shortages and social chaos wrought by nearly 20 years of abusive rule. Until now, President Obama has preferred dialogue between the regime and its victims, even at the cost of keeping Maduro in power. However, the recent anti-democratic steps directed by hardliners in the regime are a direct challenge to Washington and the international community. Now, how they respond will determine whether Venezuela hurtles toward violence or recovers its democracy. For months, the opposition has run a procedural obstacle course to invoke a provision of the Constitution to allow citizens to convene a recall referendum to oust Maduro and trigger a snap election to choose a successor. Now, according to a late September poll, nearly 70% of Venezuelans would vote to oust Maduro. Until last week, the Maduro-controlled Electoral Council grudgingly facilitated the referendum, while placing bureaucratic hurdles to delay the process. On Thursday, however, PSUV authorities voided the referendum altogether, canceling a 3-day petition drive that was set to begin this week. Clearly, the regime preferred the political repercussions from killing the recall outright to the spectacle of several million Venezuelans mobilizing to repudiate Maduro. So, even though 70% in Venezuela, so 70% in Venezuela is millions of people, want this leader out of there, they're finding a way to keep him in. So hopefully they can figure out a way to get this leader out of there, because we touched on it in an earlier segment and we'll touch on it here next with our next story. The Venezuelan crisis is only getting worse. Food shortages, medical shortages, and it's because of the leader Maduro. So he needs to get out of there and we need to help them. But now Human Rights Watch keeps us in Venezuela and says the Venezuelan crisis has no more time to waste. If the Vatican sits down to mediate between the Venezuelan government and the opposition, it should bring to the table an objective assessment of the situation on the ground and recognize as a point of departure the government's responsibility for both the creation and the solution of the crisis. Now, any meaningful dialogue must ensure that Maduro administration commits itself to releasing arbitrarily jailed opponents, carrying out a timely recall referendum, and allowing the opposition-led National Assembly to legislate. But it should also press the government to address the profound humanitarian crisis that Venezuela is facing. A new Human Rights Watch report found that in the past 2 years, basic medicines and medical supplies have become almost impossibly scarce. Now, hospitals struggle to assemble such staples as antibiotics, painkillers, rubber gloves, and gauze. Now, doctors are forced to ask patients to bring their own if they can find them. Most essential medicines are unavailable at pharmacies. Doctors and public health experts told us that the shortages have contributed to a maternal mortality rate that's up 79% in the first 5 months of 2016 over the latest available official figures. Now, infant mortality alone was up 45% from 2013. Now, the international community would provide emergency aid, but President Maduro blocked an effort by the opposition-led National Assembly to ask for it. Aid groups told us they have faced obstacles when they tried to register to operate legally in the country and to import supplies. In recent months, some Latin American leaders, including President Mauricio Macri of Argentina, Foreign Minister Jose Serra of Brazil, and President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski of Peru, have started speaking strongly about the need for President Maduro's government to stop posturing and work more seriously to alleviate the crisis. So it's good that other countries are putting pressure on Venezuela and President Maduro, if you can call him president, to fix this crisis, to do something about it, because they are not letting human rights organizations bring aid into the country. They're not allowing any help whatsoever and refuse to acknowledge that there is even a crisis. So hopefully, with these leaders of other countries coming out and calling out Maduro and Venezuela about the crisis, hopefully something can change for the better here soon. At least that's what we hope for. Now, to end the show, the Pew Research Center shows voters are divided on which candidate to vote for. As the presidential campaign enters its final days, opinions about American democracy and the candidates' respect for democratic institutions, as well as their respect for women, minorities, and other groups in society, have emerged as political flashpoints. The latest survey by Pew Research Center, conducted October 20th through the 25th among 2,500 adults, including 2,120 registered voters, finds broad agreement about the importance of some aspects of democracy, such as fair and open elections. While Trump voters attach great importance to fair and open elections, they are skeptical that the upcoming election will meet this standard. Just 43% have a great deal or fair amount of confidence the presidential election will be open and fair, while 56% have not too much confidence or no confidence at all that this will occur. More than twice as many Clinton supporters, 88%, as Trump supporters are confident that the upcoming election will be open and fair. Now, the survey finds considerable evidence of the bitterness unleashed by the presidential campaign. Dating back to 1988, no candidate, Democrat or Republican, has been viewed as more critical of their opponent than is Trump today. Currently, 62% of voters say Trump has been too personally critical of Clinton, which is about 10 percentage points higher than the previous peak. Now, just 36% say he has not been too critical of Clinton. By comparison, 44% say Clinton has been too personally critical of her opponent, which is higher than the share saying that Barack Obama during either of his campaigns. So, as the campaign gets closer, you listen to the news, it says, oh, Clinton's ahead in the polls, Trump's ahead in the polls. And while that may be, the percentage of people in the nation, in the United States, are pretty equally divided on who to vote for. And in my opinion, it's an opinion of who should we not vote for rather than who should we vote for. So we'll keep an eye on this as November 8th is fastly approaching. We'll keep going back to the Pew Research Center and see if they send out any newer surveys towards the election or if they send one out immediately after, because we're going to keep our eye on the open and fair elections, since that is a huge talking point in the presidential debate about the elections being rigged. So if any breaking news comes out about that, we will make sure to cover it here on the show. But that does it for your Top Think Tanks review, ladies and gentlemen. You can find all the links directly to these articles below in the description. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, or give us a like on Facebook. But thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen, and that does it. I was your host, Bryce Dolan.